At its height, St. Louis drew nearly 20 million visitors to its World's Fair, and moved more freight than almost any city in America. But if you look closer, the real story is not about sudden disaster. It's about how a hidden decision in 1876 quietly split the city from its future growth. This is why the fall of St. Louis was not an accident, but something much stranger. The scars remain, if you know where to look. Steam whistles echoed along the Mississippi as barges unloaded grain, lumber, and coal by the millions of tons. At the turn of the 20th century, St. Louis pulsed with movement. In 1904, the city welcomed nearly 20 million people to its World's Fair, a celebration so grand it drew crowds larger than the population of most states. Union Station, the largest and busiest train terminal in the world at the time, funneled more than 7 million passengers in a single year. On peak fair days, over 100,000 travelers stepped onto its platforms, while up to 320 trains rumbled in and out daily, connecting St. Louis in every direction. Along the riverfront, steamboats hauled more than 14 million tons of freight each year, making this city the busiest inland port in America. By 1950, St. Louis counted 857,000 residents, the fourth largest in the nation. Its streets were crowded with workers, shopkeepers, and families from across the globe. Factories and breweries lined the avenues, their smokestacks rising above neighborhoods stitched together by streetcars and ambition. Here, in the heart of the continent, St. Louis was not just a city, it was the gateway through which America moved, dreamed, and grew. In 1876, a narrow vote forever changed the fate of St. Louis. City leaders and business interests, frustrated with sharing resources and power with the surrounding county, pushed for a radical solution: break away and create a new independent city. A board of 13 freeholders, chosen outside the usual party lines, drafted a charter that would draw a permanent border, fixing the city at 61 square miles. The new lines included Forest Park, Tower Grove, and other prized land, promising the city all the territory it would ever need. The final tally was razor thin. City voters approved the separation by just over 350 votes, while county residents rejected it. Once the recount settled, the charter's permanence clause locked the city's boundaries for good. No future annexation. No way to grow with the suburbs. The decision, meant to secure prosperity and control, quietly set in motion a slow drain of people and wealth as new development spilled outward, leaving the city fenced in. If you want more stories about cities that used to run the country and how they quietly get left behind, subscribe to Cityfall. Rows of new houses stretched across the county line, each one a promise of space, privacy, and modern convenience. In the years after World War II, a quiet exodus began. Returning veterans found the GI Bill waiting for them, offering low-interest mortgages and the dream of home ownership. But the fine print favored new construction outside the city, fueling a wave of building in places like Normandy, Ferguson, and Kirkwood. While St. Louis's boundaries stayed frozen, the suburbs multiplied, drawing away families, businesses, and tax dollars. At the heart of this transformation stood Harland Bartholomew, the city's chief planner for nearly 3 decades. His blueprints reshaped the region, not just with parks and boulevards, but with plans that prioritized cars over streetcars and highways over neighborhoods. The 1947 Comprehensive City Plan called for sweeping changes, warning that without bold action, the city's core would wither. Bartholomew and his team mapped routes for new interstates, Interstate 64, Interstate 70, and Interstate 44. Cutting straight through dense urban blocks, construction crews leveled entire neighborhoods to make way, and by the late 1950s, over 20,000 residents had been forced from their homes in projects like Mill Creek Valley. Nearly all were black. Churches, small businesses, and family homes disappeared, replaced by ribbons of concrete and the promise of faster commutes. Federal dollars poured in to subsidize these projects, with the Housing Act of 1949 and the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 channeling billions nationwide. In St. Louis, the city's own 1955 bond issue set aside millions for renewal, but the benefits rarely reached those displaced. Instead, the new highways made it easier than ever for people to move out, and harder for the city to hold on to its tax base. The boundaries drawn in 1876 now worked like a dam, trapping the city's shrinking population inside while new developments flourished just beyond reach. The Mill Creek clearance alone wiped away 454 acres, 93% of its buildings gone in a few years. Official reports describe the area as blighted, but census data and oral histories reveal a vibrant community before the bulldozers arrived. Most families received little support in relocating. Many ended up in public housing projects like Pruitt-Ego or in overcrowded neighborhoods to the north and west. The city's population began a steep decline. From 857,000 in 1950, the number would fall by more than half over the next several decades. As the suburbs grew, the city's obligations stayed the same. Maintaining miles of streets, schools, and water lines for a shrinking, aging population became a losing battle. The hollowing out had begun, not as a single catastrophe, but as a slow, relentless movement outward, one mortgage and 1 mile at a time. In the years after World War II, the city's factories still hummed with activity, but the foundation was already starting to crack. Wartime contracts had brought thousands into plants that churned out ammunition, aircraft parts, and steel. When the orders stopped in 1945, so did the paychecks. St. Louis lost nearly 80,000 war-related jobs almost overnight. For a while, the city's manufacturing engine kept running. Auto plants, breweries, and chemical works still filled the air with the sounds and smells of industry. But the cracks widened as the decades rolled on. The 1950s and 1960s brought a new kind of departure. Major employers began to look for cheaper land and lower taxes beyond the city's fixed border. Beck and Corbett Iron Company, a fixture in North St. Louis for generations, packed up and moved to the suburbs in 1956, leaving behind empty warehouses and idle tracks. Steel and chemical plants followed, their jobs vanishing with little warning. The city's industrial base, once its pride, started to erode as companies chased incentives and modern facilities outside city limits. By the late 20th century, St. Louis had lost an estimated 92,000 manufacturing jobs, a slow bleed that hollowed out entire neighborhoods. Aerospace, once a beacon of hope, turned out to be brittle. McDonnell Douglas, the city's aerospace giant, rode the boom of Cold War contracts but faced repeated cycles of layoffs and uncertainty. Each downturn sent ripples through the local economy, shrinking payrolls and closing the doors of suppliers and small businesses that depended on the plants. The city's dependence on a handful of large employers made every contraction feel like a body blow. The numbers told the story. In 1950, St. Louis's population topped 850,000, and manufacturing supported a broad middle class. By 1970, the city had lost more than 200,000 residents, and the industrial jobs that once anchored families were slipping away. The payroll decline was not just a statistic. It meant fewer dollars circulating in local stores, fewer taxes for schools and services, and more vacant lots where factories once stood. Municipal finance experts warned of a dangerous feedback loop. As jobs left, so did people. Property values fell, the city's tax collection shrank, but the cost of maintaining streets, water lines, and emergency services stayed the same. With each closure, the city's ability to pay for its own upkeep weakened. The factories that had once held the city together became silent reminders of what had been lost. St. Louis's unraveling was not a single event. It was a slow motion process, measured in layoffs, plant relocations, and payroll slips. The city bled jobs to the suburbs and beyond, and with them went the resources needed to sustain its neighborhoods. The consequences soon became visible, not just in empty factories, but in the fabric of everyday life across the city. Pruitt-Ego rose above the St. Louis skyline in the mid-1950s. Its white towers promised a fresh start for families displaced by urban renewal. For some, moving in felt like a step toward stability, a clean apartment, a playground just outside, neighbors who knew your name. But the promise did not last. Within a decade, broken elevators, vandalized hallways, and unreliable heat became part of daily life. By the early 1970s, entire buildings stood empty. In 1972, the first tower came down in a televised explosion, watched across the country as a symbol of American urban failure. But behind the spectacle, families had already scattered, some to other city projects, others to crowded blocks in North St. Louis where jobs were vanishing and schools struggled to stay open. Just a few miles west, the central West End followed a different path. Historic brick homes and leafy streets drew new investment in the 1970s. Local businesses reopened, art galleries and cafes took root, and homeowners organized to preserve the neighborhood's character. While vacancy crept across much of the city, this district stabilized. Residents recall block parties, garden tours, and a sense of safety that felt rare elsewhere. For some, it became a pocket of resilience in a city otherwise losing its footing. On the north side, the story was harsher. Families who had once lived in Mill Creek or Pruitt Ego watched their blocks empty out. Abandoned houses lined the streets, windows boarded, yards overgrown. Churches closed, corner stores vanished, and bus service grew unreliable as the city's resources thinned. A grandmother remembers the hum of factory whistles and the noise of children playing outside, sounds replaced by silence and the distant echo of demolition crews. The loss was not just about buildings or jobs, but the unraveling of daily life. In St. Louis, decline settled unevenly, sometimes between neighbors, sometimes across a single street. National headlines have a way of flattening a city into a single word. For St. Louis, that word is often dangerous. Year after year, the city lands near the top of America's crime rankings, lists built from FBI statistics that rarely mention shrinking boundaries or lost jobs. In 2020, St. Louis recorded a homicide rate of 64.5 per 100,000, the highest in the nation that year. These numbers ripple through news cycles, shaping the city's image far beyond its borders. Convention planners cite crime rankings when skipping St. Louis for their next event. Investors scrutinize per capita rates, then steer their money elsewhere. Even as violent crime trends downward, the reputation lingers, locking the city into a narrative that is hard to shake. Yet beneath the headlines, anchors remain, institutions and icons that have outlasted the city's slow fade. The Gateway Arch rises over the Mississippi, a symbol of ambition and possibility. The St. Louis Cardinals fill Busch Stadium summer after summer, drawing crowds from across the region. Washington University attracts students and researchers from around the world, its campus a hub of innovation and stability. Anheuser-Busch, Forest Park, and historic neighborhoods like Soulard and Lafayette Square offer glimpses of the city's deep roots. On paper, these assets rival those of any major metro. They generate jobs, tourism and pride, even as the city's population shrinks. The paradox is hard to ignore. St. Louis holds on to world-class institutions, but the system around them is fractured. The fixed city boundaries wall off much of the region's new wealth. Suburban growth flows past, leaving the core to manage aging infrastructure and a shrinking tax base. Reputation becomes its own barrier, deterring new investment, slowing recovery, and reinforcing the very conditions that feed the cycle. In St. Louis, value and stigma exist side by side. The story is not just about what was lost, but about what endures, and how the city's future remains tangled in the shadows of its past. In 2019, a coalition of business leaders and civic groups put forward a plan called Better Together. The idea was simple on paper: reunite the city of St. Louis with St. Louis County, finally undoing the 1876 split that had locked the city inside its own borders. Supporters argued that a single government could share resources, streamline services, and pull the region back together. But as the details came out, over who would pay school taxes, who would set police policy, who would control the purse strings, opposition mounted. Suburban residents feared higher taxes and loss of autonomy. City residents worried about losing what little power they still held. In May 2019, after months of debate, the proposal collapsed. The lines drawn more than a century earlier remained in place. Today, St. Louis stands as a cautionary model. The city's population has dropped to around 302,000, a third of what it was in 1950. The metro area sprawls across dozens of municipalities, each guarding its own budget, its own police force, its own sense of identity. The city's fixed boundaries mean it cannot capture the growth or the wealth of its own suburbs. The result is a patchwork of local governments, each too small to solve problems that cross every border: crime, vacancy, economic stagnation. The lesson is not just about St. Louis. It is a warning to any city where fragmentation, population loss, and economic drift go unchecked. When the system breaks apart, even the strongest anchors cannot hold everything together. Cities do not always fall in flames or headlines. Sometimes the quiet decisions, lines drawn and mergers blocked, set the course for decades of slow decline. If you want to see how other American cities are facing pressure beneath the surface, subscribe to Cityfall. Leave a comment about which city should be covered next, and share the story with someone who cares about the fate of our cities. Today, St. Louis's population is a third of its 1950 peak, and its fractured region still divides opportunity and investment. As more cities face shrinking cores and suburban drift, the blueprint of quiet decline spreads. The lesson is clear. When a city loses its center, it risks becoming invisible, not just on maps, but in the nation's memory. Which city do you think could be next?